If you ever want to know how a life breaks, don't look for the moment it shatters. Look for the moment you choose to ignore a warning because you're tired of being alone. I told myself I deserved peace. I told myself my daughter deserved stability. And when Eric smiled at me under the fluorescent lights of a small neighborhood store, I mistook relief for safety. My name isn't important at first. That's what I used to believe anyway, that I could disappear into the role of wife and mother and let the title stand in for the woman underneath it. I spent years making myself easy to live with, predictable, useful, quiet when the room wanted quiet. Then my marriage ended, not with screaming, not with a scene, not with anything dramatic enough to make it feel real. My husband and I just separated, like a photo that fades from the sun. We still looked like a family from far away, but up close the color was gone. Chris was 19 when it became official. 19 is old enough to say, I'm fine, and young enough to mean, I have no idea what I'm doing. She had my dark hair and my stubborn eyes. She carried herself like she'd never needed anyone, because she'd watched me need someone and pay for it. When I told her we were divorcing, she didn't cry. She nodded once, as if I'd confirmed something she'd already known. Okay, she said. So what happens now? The question landed in my chest like a weight, because I didn't know. I'd spent so long managing the marriage, adjusting, negotiating, smoothing, that I'd forgotten how to live without bracing for someone else's mood. I worked, I cooked, I cleaned, I paid bills, I kept my face calm. And at night, when Chris went to her room and shut her door, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands like they belonged to a stranger. Years went by in that half-life, not miserable, not happy, just functional. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I ran out of coffee. It's almost embarrassing how small the beginning was. Not fate. Not fireworks. Coffee. The store was the kind of place you forget 5 minutes after you leave it. Bright aisles, quiet music, a clerk who looked bored enough to be cruel. I was comparing prices when a man reached around me for a jar I didn't even want. Sorry, he said. Didn't mean to crowd you. He stepped back immediately. No lingering, no smirk, no entitlement, just distance. I glanced at him, mid-30s, maybe older, clean, put together, the kind of face that had learned how to look calm on purpose. It's fine, I said, and went back to the shelf. I should have ended it there. A polite exchange, nothing more. But he added, Coffee's getting expensive. I swear it was half this last year. It was such a normal thing to say that my body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders loosened. A laugh escaped me, small, surprised. I know, I said. At this rate, I'm going to start drinking water out of spite. He smiled, not wide, not performative. Just a quick curve of the mouth like he was trying not to seem too pleased with himself. Eric, he said, offering his hand like we were in a world where people still did that. I hesitated for half a second, not because I was scared of him, because I was rusty at letting anyone close enough to matter. I took his hand. Hi, I gave him my name. It sounded strange in my own mouth, like I hadn't used it in a while. He let go before the grip could become a claim. That mattered to me, even then. We talked right there between the shelves, not deep, not intimate, just small truths. He lived nearby. He worked in logistics for a regional company. He hated traffic. He'd recently moved back after a breakup that needed to end. I didn't tell him about my divorce. Not yet. I didn't want pity, and I didn't want advice, and I didn't want the look men sometimes get when they realize you're available, like you're an open seat. He didn't ask for my story. He didn't pry. Instead, he said, If you have 5 minutes, there's a coffee place across the street. I'm not trying to be weird. You seem easy to talk to. That sentence hit me harder than it should have. You seem easy to talk to. No one had said anything like that to me in years. My husband had talked at me, not with me. My friends had drifted away because I kept choosing my marriage over connection, and then I had nothing left when the marriage failed. I looked at my basket. Coffee, eggs, bread, the normal weight of a normal life, I should have gone home. But I said, 5 minutes. 5 minutes became 40. We sat in a corner with chipped mugs and bad pastries, and I found myself answering questions I hadn't been asked in a long time. What do you do? What do you like? What's your day actually like? Not, what can you give me? Not, what can you fix? Just interest. When I finally checked my phone, I saw a text from Chris. You home? I stared at it too long before replying. Almost. Just grabbing coffee. She sent back, okay, no emoji, no questions, just okay. That should have warned me too, how quickly my daughter learned to treat my life as background noise. But I was standing in the doorway of something bright, and I wanted to step into it. Eric and I started seeing each other in a careful, adult way. Dinner once a week, a walk, a movie, no rushing, no pressure. He never showed up unannounced. He never demanded my time. He never complained when I said I had to be home for Chris. And because he didn't demand, I gave. A little more. And more. Chris met him after 3 months. She didn't make it hard. That wasn't her style. She watched him the way she watched everything, quiet, assessing, like she was waiting for the trick. Eric brought her a small gift the first time, a book he'd noticed on her social media. Not expensive, not a bribe, just proof he'd paid attention. Chris said, thanks, and actually meant it. I saw that, and my heart lifted like a fool. I wanted this to work so badly. A year later, Eric proposed. There wasn't a crowd, no staged photographer, no public pressure, just him in my living room, on one knee, holding a ring like it was a promise he intended to keep. I'm not asking you to save me, he said. I'm asking you to build with me. I said yes, and when I told Chris, she gave me a tight smile and said, if he makes you happy, then fine. Fine. Not happy for me, not excited, fine. I ignored that too. We got married in a small ceremony. Family, a few friends, no drama. I wore a simple dress. I looked in the mirror that morning and saw a woman I almost recognized again. Not just a mother, not just someone who survived a bad marriage. A woman with a future. When we moved in with Eric, the house felt like new air. Fresh paint, space, the sound of a dishwasher running, a yard Chris could pretend she didn't care about. The first week was calm. The second week, I noticed little shifts. Chris staying in the kitchen longer when Eric walked in. Eric offering to help her with things she didn't ask help for. Their conversations starting and stopping when I entered the room. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself I was lucky. And when I caught the first look, the quick, private one between them, gone so fast I couldn't prove it, I did what I'd trained myself to do for years. I swallowed the discomfort. I smiled. I kept the peace. Because I didn't want to be the kind of woman who ruins her own happiness with suspicion. Because I wanted to believe I was finally safe. And because the truth, the real truth, was that I was so afraid of being alone again that I accepted uncertainty as the price of love. That was my mistake. And it was already moving through my house like smoke. I'm going to be precise now, because precision is what I failed to use then. Moving in together wasn't chaotic. It was efficient. That's why I trusted it. Boxes arrived on a Saturday morning. Eric had labeled every one of them in clean black marker. Kitchen, office, Chris, garage, no confusion, no overlap. Each thing had a place, and he made sure it went there. Order calms me. It always has. Disorder feels like a warning sign, and that house didn't feel disorderly at all. Chris stayed mostly silent that day. She moved her boxes herself, refused help, carried her life upstairs like she didn't want anyone touching it. I told myself that was independence. I told myself I'd raised her right. Eric noticed and said, she's capable. That's good. I heard approval. I didn't hear distance. That night, the three of us ate dinner together at the long wooden table he'd refinished himself. He talked about the neighborhood, the commute, the grocery store down the street with the better produce. Chris listened. I watched them both. Nothing was wrong. That's the dangerous part. Nothing you can point to. Nothing you can accuse. After dinner, Eric washed dishes without being asked. Chris wiped the counter. I dried and put things away. It looked like a photograph of a functioning family, and I wanted that photograph so badly that I didn't question who was holding the camera. The first week passed quietly. Chris went out with friends. Eric worked late some nights. I unpacked, organized, learned the rhythms of a new space. I slept well. That mattered to me. I hadn't slept well in years. The second week introduced changes. Eric started asking Chris about her day in detail. Not inappropriate questions, just attentive ones. Classes, friends, plans. He remembered answers. When I talked about work, he listened too, but his attention shifted faster, like my life had fewer sharp edges. I noticed. I didn't confront. Chris began staying home more, sitting at the kitchen island scrolling her phone while Eric cooked, laughing at comments that weren't especially funny, letting silence stretch between them without discomfort. Again, nothing concrete. So I did what I've always done when something feels off, but not provable. I corrected myself. I told myself I was projecting old fears onto a new man. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself that suspicion without evidence is just insecurity wearing a mask. That's a lie people tell themselves to avoid responsibility, because responsibility would have meant acting early. One evening, I came home later than usual. Traffic, a meeting that ran long. When I walked in, the house was quiet except for voices in the living room. Eric and Chris were sitting on the couch. Not touching. Just close. Too close for a father-daughter dynamic that didn't exist, but close enough to still pass as innocent if you wanted it to. They stopped talking when they saw me. Not abruptly, not guiltily. Just paused. "How was work?" Eric asked. "Fine," I said. Chris stood up immediately. "I'm going to my room." She didn't look at me when she said it. I watched her leave. I waited for something inside me to click into place, to demand clarity. Instead, I sat down and took off my shoes. That night, in bed, I asked Eric a neutral question. Not an accusation. A probe. "You and Chris seem to get along." He didn't hesitate. "That's important." "She's smart," he said. "And she's been through a lot. I want her to feel comfortable here." The answer was clean, reasonable, hard to argue with. So I nodded and turned off the light. Here's the rule I didn't follow then, and I'm stating it clearly now. If you feel the need to monitor instead of trust, something is already wrong. The following weeks reinforced the pattern. Eric volunteered to drive Chris places, to help her with things, to give advice she hadn't asked me for. He framed it as support. She accepted it as attention, and I let it happen, because intervening would have required admitting I might have made a mistake, and I wasn't ready to face that. The house slowly rearranged itself around them, their schedules aligned. Their conversations overlapped. I became the constant, the predictable background presence who made dinners and paid bills and assumed stability was enough. One afternoon, I found a mug in the sink with lipstick that wasn't mine. Chris doesn't wear lipstick. I held the mug longer than necessary, long enough to consider asking a question, long enough to feel my heart pick up speed. Then I put it in the dishwasher. That's the moment I crossed a line, not into ignorance, but into cooperation with my own denial, because I knew something didn't belong, and I chose not to ask who it belonged to. That night, I stood in the hallway outside Chris's room. The door was closed. Music played softly on the other side. Normal teenage noise. Nothing alarming. Eric was in his office, door open, typing. Everything looked fine. And that's the most dangerous lie a life can tell you, because fine is what exists right before the truth forces its way in. I went to bed thinking I was holding things together. What I was actually doing was giving them space, and space, when misused, becomes permission. You don't miss the big signs, not at first. You miss the small ones because they come dressed as normal life. The first look I ignored happened on a Monday. Chris was at the kitchen island eating cereal out of a mug, lazy, half awake. Eric walked in behind her, loosened his tie, and reached past her for a spoon drawer. nothing unusual. But when she turned her head, their eyes met. It wasn't flirtation, not openly. It was worse than that. Quiet familiarity. A look that said, I see you when no one else is paying attention. And I was standing right there. I watched it happen and still told myself I'd imagined it. Because admitting it would have meant taking action, and action would have meant risking my marriage. And I wasn't ready to risk anything. I wanted to keep what I'd built. So I did what weak people do when reality demands strength. I softened the truth until it fit inside a comfortable story. That week, Chris started running errands more often. Nothing dramatic. Quick trips, short drives, always vague. Where are you going? I asked once. Just out, she said, already halfway to the door. With who? She paused like the question offended her. Why does it matter? It mattered because she'd never spoken to me like that. Not with that sharp edge. But instead of holding the line, I backed off. Fine, I said. Be home for dinner. She gave a small nod and left. I watched her taillights fade and felt a pressure behind my ribs that I refused to name. Eric wasn't home yet. He texted, running late, don't wait up. I stared at his message. Then I stared at the clock. I did not connect the dots. Not because the dots weren't there, because connecting them would have forced me to accept what kind of man I'd brought into my home. 2 days later, I went upstairs to put away clean towels. Chris's door was slightly open. I didn't mean to look in, but my eyes caught movement, a fast shift. She was on her bed with her phone. She tilted the screen away from the doorway as soon as she sensed me. That's the detail that matters. People don't hide screens from people they trust. I knocked lightly. Towels. Thanks, she said, too quick. I placed them on her dresser. Everything okay? Yeah. Her voice was flat, controlled. I stood there an extra second, waiting for her to meet my eyes, waiting for some sign that I was still her mother and not just the woman who lived in the house. She didn't look up, so I left. And I told myself, she's 19. She's moody. This is normal. That lie became my routine. Then the mug happened again. Different day. Same sink. Same kind of lipstick. I didn't touch it this time. I just stood there and stared. Eric came in behind me, quiet. You okay? I turned the mug so the stain was visible. Whose is this? He looked at it. Just a glance, then back at me. No surprise, no confusion. That was the first true warning, how smoothly he moved through the moment. Probably one of Chris's friends, he said. They've been over a few times. You know how kids are. Kids. He said it like he'd decided my daughter was a category, not a person, like she was something he could manage with generalities. I watched his face while he spoke. The confidence in his answer didn't calm me. It irritated me, because it wasn't a guess. It was a dismissal. I kept my voice level. Which friend? He shrugged. I don't keep track. Another clean exit. I let him have it. That night, I went through the house like a woman pretending she wasn't searching. I picked up laundry, wiped counters, straightened pillows. I looked for evidence without admitting to myself that I was looking for evidence. And I found something small, tucked under the edge of the living room coffee table, an earring back. Not mine. Chris doesn't wear that style. I held it between my fingers. Cold metal, sharp point. It pricked my skin. And still, I didn't confront. I put it in a drawer, like I could store suspicion the way I stored spare batteries. The next morning, I watched Chris from the doorway while she made toast. She was humming, almost smiling to herself. Eric came in and said, "Morning." Chris looked up with that same soft focus I'd seen before. Morning. Their voices matched, quiet, private. I stepped forward, loud on purpose. Chris, can you help me tonight with groceries? She blinked like she'd forgotten I existed. What? I need help after work. Her face tightened. I have plans. With who? There it was again, irritation, like my question was an offense. Why are you interrogating me? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I didn't soften. Because you live in my home, I said. Because I'm your mother. Because you've been acting different. Chris's eyes flashed. Maybe I'm just tired of you treating me like I'm 15. Eric stepped in, calm, controlled, the mediator. She's an adult, he said gently. Let her breathe. I looked at him. That was the second true warning. He didn't support my authority as her parent. He undermined it while pretending to be reasonable, and I let him do it. Because part of me was relieved to have someone else manage her. Part of me wanted to hand over the hard parts of parenting to a man who looked steady. That was my weakness. I'm not proud of it. I'm naming it. That evening, Chris left early. Eric left to run errands. I was alone in the house with silence so loud it felt like pressure in my ears. I stood in the kitchen and made a decision I should have made weeks earlier. I would stop pretending. Not with confrontation yet, with observation, with facts. I checked the trash, receipts, fast food wrappers, a movie ticket stub, 2 tickets, dated the night Chris said she was out with friends. I held the stub and stared at the time. Eric had been working late that night. My hands didn't shake. My body went cold instead. That's what happens when denial starts to crack. The heat leaves first. I didn't storm upstairs. I didn't call Chris. I didn't text Eric. I sat at the table and waited. When Eric came home, he looked normal, relaxed. He kissed my cheek like it was a habit. "Good day?" he asked. I studied him. Every word, every movement. The ease of a man who believed he was in control. "Fine," I said. "How about you?" "Busy," he replied. "Just life." He went to wash his hands, and I watched him walk away, thinking one hard, clear thought. If I'm wrong, the truth will withstand scrutiny. If I'm right, it won't. I went upstairs to my bedroom and closed the door. Then I opened my laptop and began doing what I should have done the first time my stomach spoke. I started tracking times, patterns, stories that didn't match, not because I wanted to destroy my marriage. Because I refused to be the last person to know what was happening in my own house. Once you decide to look, you stop being surprised. Surprise is for people who expect honesty. I didn't confront immediately. That mattered. I needed proof, not feelings. Feelings can be dismissed. Proof forces a response. So I watched. I wrote things down. Times Eric said he'd be late. Times Chris left early. Days their schedules overlapped too neatly to be coincidence. Patterns form fast when you stop lying to yourself. On Wednesday, Eric said he had a client dinner. He even named the restaurant. That was a mistake. Specific lies always are. At 8:30, I drove past it. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I saw enough from the street. Empty patio, lights dim, staff cleaning. Closed early. I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. I went home, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. Eric came in at 10, relaxed, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his usual one. He hung his jacket carefully. He was performing normal. "How was dinner?" I asked. "Long," he said. "Productive." That was lie number 1. I nodded. "Where did you say it was again?" He didn't answer immediately. That pause, the fraction of a second where his brain searched for the story he'd already told, that was the confirmation. "You know," he said lightly, "that Italian place downtown." I smiled once, small, controlled. "They close at 9 on Wednesdays." There it was, the shift, not panic, not anger, calculation. "Huh," he said. "Must have been another location." That was lie number 2. I stood up, not abruptly. Calm movements communicate power. "Eric," I said, "if you're going to lie to me, you need to do it better than that." He watched me carefully now. "Why are you doing this?" That question told me everything. He didn't ask what was wrong. He asked why I was challenging him. "Because something in this house isn't right," I said, "and you're part of it." He exhaled slowly. "You're being paranoid." Lie number 3. The classic one. Shift the problem onto the woman who noticed. I didn't raise my voice. Paranoia doesn't come with timestamps. I picked up the movie ticket stub from the drawer and set it on the table between us. He looked at it. Really looked. 2 tickets, I said. Tuesday night. You told me you were working late. Chris said she was with friends. Silence. This time he didn't rush to fill it. He was thinking, adjusting. It was a group thing, he said. I ran into her and her friend there. Coincidence. Lie number 4. I leaned forward slightly. Then you won't mind explaining why Chris's location history puts her across town with you for 3 hours. He stiffened, not visibly, but his shoulders locked. You checked her location? He asked. I met his eyes. I'm her mother. That ended that line of defense. He straightened, face neutral again. You're crossing a line. No, I said. I'm finally drawing one. I waited. Silence is a tool. People rush to fill it when they're guilty. You're misinterpreting things, he said. I've been helping her through some stuff. She trusts me. There it was, the framing, mentor, protector, ally. You're not her parent, I said, and you're not neutral. His jaw tightened. You don't get to control every relationship in this house. I get to control who betrays me in my own marriage. That landed. He didn't deny it after that. Denial only works when there's plausible escape. He was cornered by his own carelessness. What exactly do you think is happening? He asked. I stood fully now. I think you're lying to me. I think you're creating secrecy with my daughter, and I think you believe you're entitled to both of us. He laughed once, sharp, defensive. That's ridiculous. I didn't flinch. Then tell me why Chris deletes messages before she comes home. That was the moment he knew I had more than he expected. He said nothing. I walked past him toward the stairs. I'm going to talk to her. He moved fast then. Don't. That single word, commanding, urgent, was the clearest proof yet. I turned back slowly. You don't get to tell me what to do with my child. She's not a child, he snapped. And there it was, the truth slipping out without permission. I nodded once. Thank you. For what? For confirming exactly what kind of man you are. I went upstairs. My legs felt steady. My hands were cold. My chest was tight, but controlled. Control matters in moments like this. Chris was in her room, door closed. I knocked. Firm. What? She said. Open the door. She did. Her face was already defensive, eyes sharp like she'd been warned. That told me he'd spoken to her before I got there. What's going on? She asked. I didn't accuse. I didn't shout. I asked one question. Are you keeping secrets with my husband? Her mouth opened, closed. Silence. That silence was louder than any confession. I didn't ask if you think it's justified, I said. I asked if it's happening. She crossed her arms. You wouldn't understand. That was the moment I lost her. Not because of what she was doing, but because of who she chose to protect. I nodded slowly. Answer me. She lifted her chin. Yes. One word. Clean. Final. I stepped back like I'd been struck, but I stayed upright. Then this stops, I said. Now. She shook her head. You don't get to decide that. Downstairs, I heard Eric's footsteps. I looked at my daughter, the girl I raised, the girl who once crawled into my bed during storms, and I saw someone else standing there, someone aligned against me. This house has rules, I said, and one of them is loyalty. Chris laughed, brittle. You're just mad because you're losing control. No, I said quietly. I'm mad because you're helping him lie to me. Eric appeared in the doorway. This isn't productive. I turned to him. Get out of her room. She invited me. That sentence sealed it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I did something far more dangerous to them. I went cold. This marriage is over, I said. You'll hear from my lawyer. Eric scoffed. You're overreacting. I looked at Chris. You can choose to stay here and respect boundaries, or you can leave with him. Her eyes flicked to him, then back to me. She didn't hesitate. I'm going with Eric. That was the last lie of the night, not spoken, but lived, because what she was really choosing wasn't him. It was rebellion disguised as independence, and it would cost her more than she understood. I turned away before they could see my face break. That night, I slept alone in my bed for the last time as Eric's wife. And the next morning, I started planning the end with the same discipline I should have used at the beginning. There's a difference between knowing something is wrong and seeing it with your own eyes. Knowing keeps hope alive. Seeing kills it cleanly. The morning after Chris chose to leave with Eric, I didn't chase them. That's important. Chasing gives power to the people running away. I stayed in the house and did something far more effective. I documented. I photographed what mattered. The state of the rooms, the missing items, the drawer where Eric kept paperwork. I made copies of financial records, bank statements, property documents. I wasn't emotional. I was surgical. Grief can wait. Leverage cannot. By noon, the house was empty, except for me. Their absence was loud, not dramatic, just hollow, like furniture removed from a room you thought you knew. I sat at the table and called a lawyer. I didn't explain the story. I stated facts, dates, names, assets, violations of trust. The lawyer listened, then said, "We can move fast." "Good," I replied. "I intend to." That afternoon, I went back to the house one last time, not as a wife, not as a mother trying to fix something, but as a woman closing a door. Eric hadn't been careful enough. In his office, behind a false sense of privacy, I found what he'd assumed I wouldn't look for: a tablet. Password protected, but not well enough. People who think they're smarter than everyone else get lazy. Messages, photos, plans. Not with Chris. With another adult woman, someone close enough to my daughter to feel like a betrayal in its own right. A friend she'd brought into my home. Someone Eric had folded into his orbit while I was busy believing him. That detail mattered. Not because it softened the betrayal, but because it clarified it. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't love. This was pattern. Eric didn't blur boundaries by accident. He erased them on purpose. The messages were explicit enough to be unmistakable. The timelines overlapped cleanly with the lies I'd already caught. And there it was, the final piece. A message from Eric that read, "She suspects something. If she asks, deny everything." I took screenshots, every one of them. I didn't feel hysterical. I felt focused. That's when revenge stopped being emotional and became procedural. I didn't confront them with what I found. Confrontation would have given them time to coordinate, to spin, to prepare. Instead, I let the lawyer handle communication. Divorce papers were filed within days. Financial accounts were frozen. Eric's access to shared funds ended before he realized what was happening. He called me, multiple times. I didn't answer. Chris texted once, "You didn't have to do this." I stared at the message, then deleted it. Here's the rule I learned the hard way. When someone chooses betrayal, they also choose consequences, even if they pretend not to understand them. Eric showed up at the house a week later, angry now, not charming, not controlled. "You blindsided me," he said. "No," I replied. "You underestimated me." He scoffed. "You're throwing everything away over misunderstandings." I handed him a printed stack of screenshots. He went quiet. That silence wasn't guilt, it was calculation collapsing. "This is illegal," he said weakly. "No," I said. "It's documented." He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time he didn't see a negotiable woman. He saw an opponent who had already moved. Chris never came with him. She stayed hidden behind texts and excuses. Distance makes cowardice easier. I didn't beg her to come home. I didn't demand explanations. I let her feel the weight of her choice. The divorce moved quickly after that, faster than Eric expected, faster than he deserved. And when the papers were signed, I felt something solid settle into place. Not relief, not victory, finality. I had lost a husband to his own decisions, and I had lost a daughter to hers, but I hadn't lost myself. That mattered more than either of them understood. This chapter isn't loud. It doesn't explode. It erodes. That's what losing a child as an adult really looks like. Not a scream, not a slammed door, but silence that stretches until it hardens into distance. Chris didn't block me. She did something colder. She replied only when necessary. Short messages, neutral words. No emotion I could respond to, no opening I could step through. That was deliberate. People think abandonment always looks like absence. Sometimes it looks like access without intimacy, like being allowed to speak but never be heard. I tested it once. I sent a message that contained no accusation, no pressure, just truth. I love you. I'm here when you're ready to talk. She replied 6 hours later. I'm fine. Please stop making this harder. That sentence told me exactly where she was standing. She had reframed herself as the one being burdened, and me as the obstacle to her comfort. I did not argue. Arguing would have told her that my love required her approval. It doesn't. Weeks passed. Through other people, I learned pieces of her new life. She was staying with Eric temporarily. She was figuring things out. She was telling a story where she was brave and misunderstood. I wasn't mentioned much in that story. That's another quiet cruelty, being edited out so no one has to reckon with what was taken. I saw her once, unexpectedly, at a cafe near campus. She looked older, not wiser, harder around the eyes. She saw me at the same moment I saw her. There was no escape without acknowledging each other. She hesitated, then walked over. Hi, she said. Hi, I replied. We stood there like strangers who shared a history neither of us wanted to touch. You look good, she said automatically. So do you, I answered truthfully. There was a pause. She shifted her weight. I don't want to fight, she said. I'm not fighting, I replied. She frowned slightly. It feels like you are. I nodded once. Because I'm not pretending. That landed. She crossed her arms, her defensive posture, the one she'd learned young. You don't know everything that happened. I know enough, I said. And I know what you chose. Her jaw tightened. You're acting like I betrayed you. You did, I said calmly. That doesn't mean I stopped being your mother. It means I stopped lying about what loyalty is. She looked away. Eric understands me. That sentence cut, but not the way she expected. Understanding without accountability isn't care. It's indulgence. I didn't say that out loud. She wasn't ready to hear it. I hope he does, I said, because I won't compete with someone who benefits from you being against me. Her eyes snapped back to mine. You're making it sound manipulative. I'm naming reality, I replied. You can reject it, but you can't change it. Silence again. Finally, she said, I need space. I nodded. Then take it. She blinked. She'd expected resistance, pleading, a chase. You're okay with that? She asked. No, I said, but I respect it. That was the moment the power shifted. I turned to leave. She didn't stop me. And that's how I knew. She wasn't ready to come back. She was still protecting the version of herself that didn't have to face consequences. At home that night, I packed away photographs. Not destroyed them, not hidden them. Just placed them somewhere safe, out of daily reach. Here is the boundary I set, clearly and without apology. I will not beg my child to treat me with basic honesty. Love does not require self-erasure. I stopped initiating contact after that. Not to punish her, but to stop rewarding distance with effort. If she reached out, I responded. Warm, direct, no tension. But I did not chase. Weeks turned into months. And slowly, something unexpected happened. I started breathing again, without the constant calculation, without wondering what I'd done wrong today, without waiting for scraps of affection to prove I still mattered. I grieved her. Quietly. Fully. Like someone grieving a living person who has chosen another life. That grief didn't make me smaller. It sharpened me. Because once you accept that you cannot control who your child becomes, You're left with one responsibility only, to become someone they either grow toward or lose. And I chose not to lose myself. The divorce didn't feel like revenge. That surprises people. Revenge is emotional, loud, messy. This was administrative. Paperwork doesn't care how you feel. It only cares what you can prove. Eric thought charm would still work. He was wrong. Once lawyers enter a room, personality exits. Facts take the seat instead. I didn't attend the first meeting in person. That was intentional. Distance unsettles men who are used to controlling the emotional temperature. My lawyer did the talking. I listened. I corrected details when necessary. Eric's strategy was predictable: delay, minimize, reframe. She's overreacting. This is being taken out of context. We can resolve this amicably. Amicable is what people say when they want concessions without accountability. I refused every informal negotiation, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I didn't want to negotiate with someone who'd already shown me what his word was worth. Assets were divided. Access was cut. The house was mine by prior agreement and documentation. That irritated him more than losing money. Men like Eric care about territory. He tried to appeal to history once. We crossed paths outside the courthouse. He looked tired, less polished. "You're really going to end it like this?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "After everything we planned?" I looked at him steadily. "Plans require honesty," he scoffed. "You always have to be right." "No," I said. "I just refuse to be lied to." That was the end of the conversation. The divorce finalized without drama. No outbursts, no last-minute confessions, just signatures and silence. When it was over, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet. Quiet is underrated. Quiet means nothing is chasing you. Chris didn't contact me when the divorce became official. That hurt in a clean, contained way. Not sharp anymore, just dull. I accepted that. Here's the boundary I enforced, without announcement. I will not let legal closure reopen emotional wounds. Eric tried once more, months later. A message, neutral tone. Checking in. I deleted it. No reply is a reply. That's when the emotional war finally ended. Not because I won, but because I withdrew my participation. I rebuilt routines, morning walks, regular meals, a house that stayed orderly because I wanted it that way, not because I was compensating for chaos. I stopped explaining myself to people who hadn't lived my life. And something else happened. Something I didn't expect. My name started to feel like mine again. Not someone's wife. Not someone's obstacle. Just me. The silence stopped being lonely and became protective. And for the first time since Chris walked out that door, I understood something clearly. Letting go isn't giving up. It's refusing to carry what isn't yours. Final distance doesn't announce itself. It confirms itself. I didn't know the last time I'd see Chris would be the last time. Not really. If I had, I would have spoken differently, or maybe I wouldn't have spoken at all. It happened through a letter, not handwritten, not personal, typed, clean margins, neutral language, like a notice you receive when a service is ending. She asked me not to contact her for a while. She said she needed clarity. She said she hoped I would respect her boundaries. There was no mention of love, no anger, no apology, just removal. I read it once, then again. Then I folded it and placed it in a drawer. I didn't cry. Crying is for loss that's still negotiating. This wasn't negotiating. This was a decision. And I respect decisions. What I didn't respect was the framing, that I was the problem she needed distance from, that my refusal to accept lies had somehow become harm. So I did the hardest thing a parent can do. I complied. No messages, no check-ins, no holidays, just in case, no third-party communication. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't announce my restraint. I simply stopped reaching. Weeks passed, then months. Silence hardens when you don't interrupt it. And in that silence, something inside me finished breaking, and then finished healing. I stopped waking up expecting a message. I stopped rehearsing conversations that weren't coming. I stopped explaining her absence to myself. Here is the truth I accepted. You cannot force a grown child to choose integrity over comfort. She had chosen comfort, and comfort required me to disappear. So I did, not as punishment, as boundary. I removed her from my daily rituals, not from my heart, but from my expectations. I stopped holding space she wasn't stepping into. That's what the door slam really is. Not anger, not rejection, but final acceptance. The house changed again after that. Not emptier, lighter. I rearranged furniture, donated things, reclaimed rooms. The physical space followed the emotional one. I didn't erase her. I integrated the reality that she wasn't coming back the way I wanted. And something solid formed in that acceptance. Dignity. Not pride, not bitterness. Dignity is quiet. It doesn't need witnesses. If Chris ever returns, it will be because she's ready to face what she chose. If she doesn't, I will still be standing. That's the ending I chose. Rebuilding doesn't feel heroic. It feels mundane. That's how you know it's real. No one applauded when I changed my routines. No one noticed when I stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning. No one congratulated me for choosing consistency over rumination. That was the point. I wasn't rebuilding for recognition. I was rebuilding because the alternative was staying frozen in a story that had already ended. I started small, deliberately. I woke up at the same time every day. I ate breakfast standing at the counter, not scrolling, not distracted. I walked the neighborhood without headphones so I could hear my own thoughts again. Some mornings, grief tried to take the lead. It showed up as heaviness, as memory, as questions with no productive answers. I didn't argue with it. I acknowledged it and kept moving. That's a discipline most people never learn. You don't need emotional permission to act correctly. I reorganized the house, not to erase the past, but to stop living around it. Chris's old room became a study, not immediately, only when it no longer felt like a provocation. I didn't ask myself if she'd be offended. I asked myself what supported the life I was actually living. That's a boundary in action. Work stabilized. Friends re-entered at a manageable distance. Not confidants, yet, but witnesses. People who didn't need the full story to treat me with respect. I noticed something then. No one questioned my choices the way they had before. When you stop defending yourself, people stop attacking. I stopped explaining why the marriage ended. I stopped clarifying Chris's absence. I used simple sentences. It didn't work. She's living her own life. I'm fine. Because I was. Not healed. Not untouched, but grounded. Eric faded completely after that. No messages, no attempts. Men like him don't linger where they've lost leverage. Chris remained silent. And here's the part that matters most. I stopped waiting for that to change. Waiting is a form of self-suspension. I refused to put my life on hold for someone who had chosen distance. That didn't mean I stopped loving her. It meant I stopped centering her choices over my stability. One evening, months later, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and paused. I looked solid. Not softer, not hardened. Solid. That's what rebuilding does when you don't rush it. It replaces desperation with weight, with presence. I didn't need permission anymore to live, to enjoy quiet, to make plans that didn't include explanations. I wasn't a woman recovering from betrayal. I was a woman operating with clarity, and clarity is power that doesn't announce itself. Closure doesn't arrive. You choose it. That's the final lesson, and it's not comforting. Comfort is the lie that keeps people circling old pain, waiting for someone else to fix it. I stopped waiting. The last time I heard Eric's name was through someone else's voice. Casual, unimportant. He'd moved on. He always would. Men like him don't reflect. They replace. I felt nothing. That's how I knew he no longer had access to me. Chris stayed silent. Not as a tactic anymore. As a settled position. I thought about writing one final letter. Something calm, loving, clear. I even drafted it in my head. Then I stopped, because that letter wasn't for her. It was for the part of me that still wanted to be seen as the good mother, the reasonable one, the one who did everything right and deserved return on investment. That part of me needed to retire. Here's the truth I accepted without decoration. You can love someone deeply and still step out of their life if staying requires self-betrayal. I didn't need answers anymore. I already had them. Eric betrayed because he could. Chris aligned with him because it was easier than facing loss. I allowed both longer than I should have because I feared being alone. Every piece fit. No mystery left. So I did the last thing that remained undone. I forgave myself. Not ceremonially, not emotionally, practically. I stopped replaying decisions. I stopped negotiating with hypotheticals. I stopped asking who I could have been if I'd acted sooner. I acted when I was ready. That's enough. If Chris returns one day, it will be as an adult willing to take responsibility for her choices, not as a daughter asking me to pretend nothing happened. If she doesn't, I will still live a complete life. That's not bitterness. That's structure. I built a life that does not collapse when someone walks away. I keep my word. I respect boundaries. I act when something is wrong. I don't trade dignity for proximity. That is the point. Not survival. Alignment. And that's where this story ends, not with reconciliation, not with revenge, but with a woman standing in a life that fits her spine. I'm not waiting anymore, and I'm not lost. I'm finished explaining.